In this video, we'll learn how to wirelessly connect the HoverCam Orbit document camera to your HDMI display, like a TV, projector, monitor, interactive flat panel, or any other display with an HDMI in port. If you're planning on connecting Orbit wirelessly to your laptop or other computer, including an OPS computer on the back of your interactive flat panel, watch the wireless USB video instead. If you get to the end of the video and you're running into trouble, check out the wireless troubleshooting video. Please note, if you're an integrator or IT team deploying more than one Orbit, please take each box into its intended room before attempting connection. Each camera is factory paired to its individual receiver, and they are not interchangeable between pairs. Please do not attempt to unbox and connect more than 3 cameras in any one room, as that will lead to cross-channel interference issues. For the best performance, we recommend only operating 1 pair per room. Before we get started, you'll need a fully charged HoverCam Orbit camera, the HoverCam Orbit wireless receiver, the included HDMI cable, and one of the included USB cables. You might also need the included power brick, depending on how you plan on powering the wireless receiver. And of course, you'll also need an HDMI display to connect the wireless receiver to. Again, this could be a TV, projector, monitor, interactive flat panel, or any other display with an HDMI in port. Also, if your camera and wireless receiver have adjustable antennas, rotate them upwards. For heat dissipation purposes, do not let the antennas lay flush against the camera or receiver's body during operation. Now let's get started by connecting the wireless receiver to your display. First, use the included HDMI cable to connect the wireless receiver to an available HDMI port on your display. If your display happens to have an HDMI port marked HDMI out, don't use that port. Secondly, we also need to connect the wireless receiver to a power source using either the included USB-C or USB-A cable. There are a few different ways you can do this. The most straightforward way is by using the included power brick and one of the USB-C cables to connect the receiver to a standard power outlet. But if you're already using the included power brick to charge your camera, you may need to find a second power brick that has the minimum power rating of 5 volts, 2 amps. However, if you're connecting to a display that happens to have USB ports, you may be able to power the wireless receiver from one of those ports with one of the provided USB cables. If you want to try this method, we'll cover it at the very end of this video. Now, back to the setup. Once connected to power, the wireless receiver will automatically power on and begin searching for the Orbit camera, indicated by the flashing blue wireless connection indicator. Now set your display's HDMI input to the port that your wireless receiver is occupying. But before we go any further, it's important that we go over the wireless receiver's positioning. Both the camera and receiver must be within the same room, and both antennas must maintain indirect line of sight with one another. Unlike Wi-Fi, Orbit's higher frequency signal does not pass through walls and other objects, so its signal needs to be able to form a path to the receiver. However, the signal can bounce off walls and ceilings in order to find its way to the receiver, so it's not always necessary to face the camera's antenna directly towards the receiver. But if you're experiencing a rough connection, facing the camera's antenna towards the receiver will give you a more stable connection. And for future reference, if your camera image is now sideways or upside down after facing the camera towards the receiver, you can actually correct the camera image by using the sensor rotation and flip image button, but more on that in a later video. Now once again, it's important to not completely block either antenna or you may experience a weak signal or failure to connect. Keep this in mind when you're sitting in front of the camera. Hovering over its antenna and blocking it could cause signal interruptions. If you're connecting to an interactive flat panel, TV, or monitor, we recommend mounting the receiver as high as possible on the bezel of the display using the included mount, and directing the receiver's antenna towards the camera. If the cables don't quite reach the top of the panel, you can always mount the receiver on the side of the panel. Just get it as high up as possible. Do not hide the receiver behind the display, as this will eliminate the line of sight required for a stable connection. If you're connecting to a projector or other HDMI device, you may need to get creative in how you position and mount the receiver. Remember, the antenna must have a completely unobstructed view of the camera. Now that your receiver is connected and properly positioned, you can finally power on your Orbit camera. Like the receiver, the camera has its own wireless indicator that will flash as it attempts to connect to the receiver. When both indicators on the camera and receiver turn solid blue, the pair is successfully connected. Connection happens automatically and should take anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. While the receiver is searching for the camera, you should see a loading screen on your display. But it's not uncommon for the pair to connect so fast that you won't even see the loading screen. Once the camera successfully connects, the loading screen will be replaced by the live camera image. To turn off Orbit, simply press and hold the power button until the indicator lights turn off. It's also a good idea to unplug the receiver at the end of the day, but if it's being powered by your display's USB port, it should automatically shut off when you turn off your display at the end of the day, and turn back on again when you turn on your display the next day. And of course, don't forget to charge the Orbit camera after use, especially overnight. Earlier in the video, we mentioned that if your display has USB ports, you might be able to provide power to the wireless receiver through one of those ports. Now, it's important to note that not every USB port is the same, as there are some ports that won't be able to provide enough power for the receiver, even though the receiver's lights may turn on momentarily. For example, the USB-C port on the side of this Newline interactive flat panel seems to work because the indicator lights on the receiver turn on when I plug it in. But after a moment, the splash screen goes away and the lights on the receiver die out. That's a clear indicator that the receiver isn't getting enough power. However, this same panel also has USB Type-A ports too, so we'll instead use the provided USB-C to A cable to connect the receiver. And voila, it works. Also, the USB-C port on the front of the panel, marked USB-C with PD, seems to work as well. Unfortunately, there's no way to definitively tell if a certain USB port on your display can provide enough power to the receiver, other than by trial and error. But if your display has any USB-C or USB-A ports that provide a minimum of 5 volts, 2 amps, theoretically they should work, and you won't need to use a power brick to connect the receiver to a regular power outlet. Now, if you're still having trouble connecting your Orbit camera to your display via wireless HDMI, check out the wireless troubleshooting video.